So let's talk about what we need to measure, what really matters, and what we mean by that. So first, let's imagine that it's Christmas, 2004. You're in Thailand, having fun on the beach. And then a 10-year-old girl says, something is wrong. There's going to be a tsunami. Would you believe her? Even the parents didn't believe Tilly, but she was right. She learned about tsunami 2 weeks prior to the holiday. She recognized that something is happening. The parents didn't believe her, but there was a Japanese tourist who spoke English, and he said, I heard there was an earthquake somewhere close. And then they quickly evacuated the beach. The tsunami arrived, 100 people survived, but almost 250,000 people died in that tsunami, in the earthquake. The point is that all the signs were there. And if what the signs are, you can recognize what's going to happen. The question is, are they going to believe you? That is the real question. And this webinar is very similar to this. All the signs are there. Changes are here. They are rapid, but a lot of people ignore them. So let's see where we start. What are the signs? The workforce is burning out, engagement is plummeting, and the leadership layer is collapsing the fastest. It's the sharpest fall on record, minus 22%. This is where we are starting. Companies spend a fortune on trying to future-proof their organization. In reality, the situation is getting worse. On top of that, around 70% of transformations fail. It's not technical, it's all about the people. Because companies don't transform, people do, if it makes sense to them. But if it doesn't, they are going to sabotage it. My name is Csaba. I'm the founder of ICQ Global. We started more than 10 years ago, and we are one of the leading experts in data-driven leadership, team, and culture transformation. And we found 3 reasons why this is happening. So we work with hundreds of companies, and we have more than 250 licensed partners in 50 countries. And we noticed 3 main reasons why most of the programs fail, and why the companies think that they are saving the company, but in reality, they are risking the future. One of the reasons is that they are addressing issues that are not the real problem. So this is the dashboard of our SUV. And you can see that there's a sign on it that says battery halfway through. That's not good. When I saw this, then I thought, let's pretend to be a real man. I Googled it quickly. I checked what I have to do, and I charged the battery all night. I checked it in the morning. It was less than before. I said, something is not right. So I called my brother, who actually understands cars, and he said, do you know that you have 2 batteries in the car? I said, no. Do you know that you cannot charge one of them? No. You were charging the wrong one. So the point is that I put a lot of effort and energy into fixing something that wasn't the problem. And that's exactly what's happening to a lot of companies as well. This is what the research shows. The MIT Sloan Management Review wanted to understand how is it possible that most of the leadership programs return negative ROI. Not that they don't work, but they are costing money and there's no benefit. And what they had to realize was that nobody measured the impact on the people who mattered the most, the team. It's like a lot of leaders attend inclusive behavior courses. They go back and they think they are doing the right thing. But if your team doesn't feel included, you're not inclusive. It's that simple. Also, often the choice was made by looking at the packaging. So it was like a corporate Tinder profile. Well, it looks good. Let's do that. So the evaluation was based on how much information or entertainment was provided. The second reason is that they're often using outdated and disconnected solutions. So most of the management and leadership models were created by people who were born just after the American Civil War. They were designed for the challenges of the 50s and 60s. But if you look at this chart, even before 75, less than 17% of the value was created by humans. They were seen as a cost to contain. Today, it's more than 90%. The world completely changed, and it's a no-brainer that new challenges require new solutions. It's almost like trying to fix a smart TV with tools designed for black and white ones. Yes, you can try it harder, but it's a different technology, different problems. And unfortunately, the results reflect that. But the third one is when you give people what they want instead of what they need. And that's a difficult one because it sounds great, but in reality, the results are not fantastic. A lot of money is spent on employee engagement programs. But there was a really interesting research. They checked 90 different interventions. And they wanted to understand which one had a positive impact, and only one of them had a slightly positive impact, and that was volunteer work. Nothing else did. You can give people a free lunch and a yoga class. Yes, you are entertaining people, but it has nothing to do with engagement. I'm not saying it's not important, but you are not addressing the challenge that you should. And at the same time, a lot of courses make you feel good, but they don't do anything. If you think about growth mindset, If you have it, it's fantastic. You attend the course and then you probably feel that your growth mindset is off the chart, which is fantastic. Maybe it's true, we don't know. But even according to Carol Dweck, who coined the term, you can have outstanding growth mindset. But if your environment is not psychologically safe and it's not nurturing, it has zero benefits, zero. We are going to conform to the norms, and the toxic environment is going to suffocate people. That's the problem with that. So a lot of investment can go into it, but they're not going to get the results that they want. We do something else. So we focus on the 9 biomarkers of high performance within the 3 invisible forces that make or break a team. And they are measurable with the same discipline as finance or operations. It's not something abstract. It's not about being nice to people. We can quantify it. We can visualize it. And if you can break down complex reality into more manageable components, then you have a better chance of optimizing it. So this webinar is not about telling you what to do. It's about sharing the insights. We made a lot of mistakes. We had lots of success as well. So I'm happy to share what we do. What do you think the lead indicator and precursor of quality decision making is that is responsible for 95% of business performance? It's a tricky question. And last time as well, we had a lot of different answers. But the very simple answer is psychological safety. It's that important. Now, the problem is that often people think that psychological safety is physical comfort. Just be nice to people and be comfortable. That's not true. It's not kumbaya. This is business. Because psychological safety is important, and most leaders and HR professionals know that. But less than 20% of them have some framework or strategy to optimize it. They know it's important, but they don't know what to do with it. And that's a disconnect that we have to address. So if you look at psychological safety, it is the #1 trait of high-performing teams. Yet, when I talk to leaders and I ask them, where is your team on this scale? 99% of them cannot answer that question. When I ask them, where was your team before you invested in a program? And where was your team after that? No idea. Would it make sense to know that? Could you make a better decision? The topic is not necessarily new. In 1788, in the UK, they introduced the Chimney Sweeper Act because people got outraged when they realized that the minimum age to become a chimney sweeper apprentice was 4 years old, and they got really agitated. And then it took only 250 years, and now you have the same health and safety categories everywhere, in most of the places, at least officially. But recently, they added a 5th one, the psychosocial one, because they realized that an attack on your psychological safety can cause much more damage than a slap in the face. But how do you prove it? How do you optimize it? That is the question. But then also Google wanted to understand what is the secret of high-performing teams. The first idea was, we don't need leaders. We are cool. Bad idea. You need leaders, but you need good ones. And they had to realize that the #1 trait was psychological safety. It's that important. Yet, most leaders have no idea where that thing is on this scale. But on its own, psychological safety is not enough because we are not a family. Netflix made it very clear. We are a high-performing team, which means that we also need motivation. We have to keep up the standards. It's the engine of high-performing teams. But how do you approach this? So Daniel Pink had a really interesting research on it. According to him, motivation 1.0 is very primal. This is the basic one. We have to survive and we have to make babies. That's it. And that's enough for a while. But we had to upgrade it. Because when you interact with other people, then we have to conform to the norms. So this is when we had to tap into motivation 2.0, extrinsic motivators, the pain and pleasure principle, the carrot and the stick. Now the problem with that is that we get used to everything, which means that you have to punish and reward people more and more to get the same result. But also what the research shows is that when it comes to creativity and white-collar jobs, the extrinsic motivation doesn't really work. Indeed, it can backfire. If you really want to tap into that potential, then you have to understand motivation 3.0, the intrinsic motivators. These are the ones that are coming from inside. You do something for the sake of the process, not the outcome, because you want to do it, you enjoy it. But it's much more difficult to see it and optimize it. There's no such thing as logical, only what matters to someone. This is what Chris Voss, the FBI hostage negotiator, said. Once you understand what drives someone, you can create that environment around them, because people motivate themselves. The more you understand that blueprint, the better decisions you can make. And depending on the level of psychological safety and motivation, your team can be in the growth zone, scoring high. They are the apathy zone if they score low on both. If they have only safety but no motivation, that's comfortable. But if they have only motivation, no safety, that's an anxiety zone. And lots of companies are that. But here's the problem with that. We know that numbers can lie. They look scientific, but they can hide the truth. So if you look at this team, as a team, they're in the growth zone. We could walk away thinking everything is all right. But if you look at the individuals, you can see that the team is polarized. And according to Amy Edmondson, even if you have one outlier, somebody who's not in the growth zone, it can affect performance by 30 or 40%. So we don't know who these people are, and that is not even the point. It's not about hunting them down, but it's about understanding. How is it possible that within the same environment, under the same leadership, some people feel like fish in the water and others feel rejected and demotivated? Assessments can bring the data only, but people have the insight. So the ultimate goal is to create meaningful conversations driven by data and rooted in science. It's not just an abstract idea. If you can quantify it, then you can see that psychological safety is 64%, motivation is 66%. It's real. But when you see the tension score, that shows how polarized a team is. And we're not talking about creative tension. No, how polarized a team is. It doesn't matter whose fault it is. It's everybody's responsibility to find out why and to improve the situation. But it's more than just invisible team dynamics. We had not the best case study, but that was in Scandinavia, an oil and gas company. Including the CEO, the leadership team scored in the apathy zone. During our program, one of the refineries burned down because the lack of psychological safety and motivation resulted in the lack of physical safety. So it wasn't great. But on the other hand, one of the best case studies, the biggest mining company in Indonesia, they had 17 accidents a week, according to the company. And 6 months later, after the program, they had 0. Indeed, they won the most prestigious awards in this category. They turned psychological safety into physical safety. So creating the right environment is really important, but there is more to it. And often this is the neglected version. Cognitive diversity, the immune system of a team. This is the invisible layer, the annoying one, the difficult one. But at the same time, this is the only layer of diversity that has proven benefit in terms of performance. And I can show you some case studies. It's not just a theory. So imagine that Pamela is the boss. She's really smart. She can see issues. And she employs people. They are also really smart, but she's not aware of one of the most powerful forces within team dynamics, homophilic diversity, which means that we like and trust people who are similar to us. That means that a team can be individually extremely smart, collectively blind. And we have plenty of case studies where, for example, you have 10 senior leaders from 8 different countries. On a surface level, it's really diverse. It's good for marketing. It looks fantastic on the website. But when they took the assessment, we have to realize that cognitive diversity was 22%, which means that if you look at the sliding scales as a range of perspectives, approaches to problems and opportunities, everybody was sitting, all the 10 people within this line, which means that they can make a decision. Probably they agree. It feels right, but it doesn't make it true because they have a huge blind spot. And that's the problem with that. So yes, we can celebrate diversity, but the brain doesn't. And we have to understand that because diversity by default means unpredictability. And that is the last thing that the brain wants. But once we can embrace reality, we can also address it and we can find a solution. The more you understand yourself, the more you understand other people who think and behave differently, the more predictable and familiar they become. And now we can turn differences into synergy instead of painful liability. The benefits of diversity are not automatic. You have to create the right environment and you have to unlock it using cultural intelligence. But it makes much more sense if we have a blueprint. And that's exactly what we do. Technically, there are 2 main approaches to understanding people. These are the mainstream ideas. One of them is the intercultural solutions. They explain what is normal and expected in certain countries. If you Google intercultural studies or models, that's exactly what you're going to find. The 5 do's and don'ts in different countries. You read it and then you think, now I understand Germans. You understand nothing. So if you look at up-to-date research, that is wrong 88 to 98% of the time. You don't understand German individuals. What you might understand is what is normal in Germany. What is it that most people conform to? That's not the same thing. Culture is not who we are. It's what we are used to. We all belong to 15 or 20 culture groups at the same time. Country of origin is a tiny fraction of that. More than 80% of cultural differences exist within countries, not between them, which is also good news. But at the same time, the poorest container of culture is country of origin, gender, and generation, meaning that based on these categories, you cannot predict an individual's values and beliefs. That has nothing to do with science. But if you look at cultural groups that you can actually choose, like your profession, maybe the country of your choice, your hobby, it's much more likely that you choose an environment that is much closer to your preferences because it feels right and you're surrounded by similar people. That is the reason why often 10 engineers from 10 different countries are much more similar inside than 10 random people from the same country, gender, or generation. And this is what we need to understand, that international differences are not a synonym for cultural intelligence. That's a tiny fraction of that. Think about it. Even if you talk to someone in your own family, what are the chances that they belong to the same 15 or 20 cultural groups like you? It's pretty much zero. Every single conversation is a cross-cultural dialogue, and every single team is multicultural, even if it's not international. And here's an interesting case study. All of these people, they grew up in Jakarta, in Indonesia, but then they took the global disc assessment. As you can see, when you put them on the sliding scale and you put the Indonesian norms as well, most of the people are not normal at all. What by that is not statistically average. So we can pretend that they look similar, the same background, but they're not. On an individual level, that is not true. So if I read about intercultural models, then I'll get really confident so I can make bigger mistakes more quickly. That's a problem. Another case study. This was a big German company and they employed a lot of Brazilian engineers and we had to create a high-performing team. Of course, we have to start with the country approach, very different. But then when they looked at the assessment, it turned out that the Brazilian engineers were much more German inside than most Germans, which was fantastic. So instead of pointing out statistically average national differences that didn't exist on individual level, to widen the gap, we created a common ground so they can learn how to make the most of the differences. Yes, they have to learn how to buy a bus ticket, but on a cognitive level, it was the right environment in terms of country and even profession. And that was like a psychological permission for them. Yes, that's good. But the other approach to understanding people is psychometric assessments. And a lot of people have their own favorite ones that, I believe in MBTI and I can choose a partner based on the result. Or it's about the 4 colors. They can be all useful, but, and there's a big but. So imagine that you profile this sunflower and you have everything about it and it's beautiful, fantastic. Where do you put it? Do you put it in the snow, in the desert, in the middle of the jungle, or the right environment? Depending on where you put it, you get very different results. We don't exist in isolation. This is what we need to understand. You cannot separate personality from culture. Your personality determines how you want to behave, but culture determines how you have to behave. And often that is much stronger than the personality. That's why you can put different people in a team, but you're not going to see the differences because most of the people are going to conform to certain norms. That's the problem with that. But the differences don't disappear. No, those are just brewing beneath the surface until they become visible. And they affect team dynamics, they affect performance, and the future of the company as well. This is where Global Disc is different because it removes the separation, the illusion of separation between personality and culture. You take the assessment, you learn about the 3 layers of your identity, what you do, how, and why. And that's really important because 95% of our actions are driven by values and beliefs we are not even aware of. But we think that we are so logical and objective. That's not true. Most people don't know themselves. They know their own habits, their own narratives, own excuses, and then, of course, we make choices that support that narrative. So it feels really real. But once you do this, we're not going to use it as an excuse. No, this is when it gets interesting because everything is relative. It's not even about the absolute scores, but it's about understanding the mindset gap between you and, for example, the countries where you grew up and where you are now. It's about measuring that mindset gap between you and another person. If you are brave enough, it can be your partner at home, but it can be the leader and employee or 2 employees as well. It's the same concept. Or we can see the mindset gap between you as a leader and your team. And this is when people realize that. That's why I try to motivate people. I try to bring out the best in them, but somehow that common sense and good intention can backfire. This is the reason why. So we're not relying on stereotypes. No, it's about data. So we don't have to guess exactly what works and what doesn't. So back to Pamela. Now she's really good. She understands the concept. And now she can focus on cognitive diversity as well. And at the end of the day, that is the real definition of cultural intelligence. The ability to see the same situation from different perspectives so you can choose to respond instead of just reacting. That's all we want to achieve. At the end of the day, it's cognitive and behavioral flexibility. It is a skill that we can use at home, at work, and even with ourselves. So depending on where your team is, based on the 3 invisible forces, they can be the growth zone. That's a fantastic place when they score high on all the 3 invisible forces. Time bomb is stage 2. It's called time bomb because if you find it, you can diffuse it. If you cannot find it, then there's going to be a problem because maybe they have a tunnel vision. If they are lacking cognitive diversity, we have plenty of case studies like that. Lots of different looking people who think the same way. Lots of agreement, huge blind spot. Or maybe it's stagnation when they don't have the drive. They're comfortable, they're different, which is great. But when you don't have psychological safety, but you have motivation and you have a lot of cognitive diversity, that leads to anxiety because that just means that you have a bunch of people who think and behave differently. Benefits are not automatic. Decline is stage 3. This is when you have problem with 2 of the invisible forces, and stage 4 is, well, it's self-explanatory, game over, but we have case studies proving that you can get out of it. So here's a very simple question. As a leader, where is your team? How do you? And I can guarantee that 99% of leaders cannot answer this question. Would it make more sense for them to know that? Could they make a better decision instead of hoping for the best, instead of addressing problems that are not the real issues? But we also know that numbers can be empowering or they can be also offensive. Unfortunately, that is true. It depends on someone's self-esteem. This is not going to cause any issues, but it can reveal what's there. And that's not always pretty. So imagine that you're in a dark room and you're bumping into everything. It's horrible, yes. You can switch on the light and suddenly, ooh, that looks bad, but at least you can see everything and you can deal with it. It didn't create a mess. It just made it more visible. That's part of it. But what's the alternative? We know where it leads to if we do nothing about it. But as you can see, this is what we can do. Data-driven leadership, team, and culture transformation. There's this 4-step process. First, you measure it. People can take the assessment. Then we discuss the results, visualize it. The insights come from the people because they don't know how to talk about something they are not aware of. So you give people the vocabulary, the frame of reference, and the data, and now we can create meaningful conversations. Then we can optimize it because we can co-create the next steps, and then we can grow. This case study is a Fortune 500 company in the US global leadership team. As you can see, they are in the apathy zone. This is not good. They are leading a lot of people. That's not a good start. 6 months later, most of them were in the growth zone, and most of the biomarkers improved. There was a bit of tension, so not everything was perfect, but we were not guessing. This is the level of transparency that we can provide. So we know exactly what to adjust, but at the same time, we have to co-create it with them. That's why we have to raise the standards, because we can make it tangible. We can quantify these invisible forces, so we can optimize them. Talking about psychological safety is not going to create it. Having a keynote speech about psychological safety without any solutions can make people even more disengaged because it just highlights the gap between what a good workplace should be like and how they feel. But the cost can be very similar. And I want to show you just a few examples, how we can use it and why this is so important. And what I referred to in the very beginning, that most of the transformations fail, 70% of them. So we are working with a client and they focus on the human side of digital transformation, but they were smart enough to do that, to check the team dynamics, because you can see it on this picture that sometimes the problem is absolutely clear. Solution is equally clear, but in between you have a bunch of people. They have very different ideas, very different motivation. They are not aligned at all. They all have baggages and it can go wrong really quickly. So when we did the initial assessment data, I realized that 4 out of the 9 biomarkers was suboptimal. So we designed a program based on that, not hoping for the best. So before they could spend a lot of money on digital transformation, they could stabilize the human side of that. Like we said it in the beginning, companies don't transform, people do, if it makes sense to them. Another interesting case study, so I did an update about this image. Data without stories are powerless. Stories without data are just noise. But when you combine both, that's when magic happens. It had more than 1 million views on LinkedIn because it hit a nerve that there's so much potential in a team, but most of it is lost. And if you look at the 3 Circle Partners research, 79% of potential is lost in a team. That's not good for the business. You employ really smart people hoping to create synergy. In reality, they are clashing. That's not ideal. So we work with the Fortune 200 pharmaceutical company. They merged 3 different departments. That was like the innovation engine of the company. Really smart people, they get a lot of money. So it makes sense to make it work. We went through the whole program, we created the right identity, and we created synergy. Later on, they did the engagement survey internally, And it was 4 times better than anything else in the last 15 years. Having said that, there wouldn't have been a success without the leader because he was absolutely committed. And often, that's the big point. But if you want to make it more scalable and sustainable, you want to build internal capability, that's an option as well. So we had one of the leading banks in Netherlands. They certified 10 internal people so they can roll it out to the 65,000 employees. Less dependency, more scalability, more sustainability. That's the beauty of it. There are different options. But the really interesting thing is I mentioned that we had more than 900 team scans. And interestingly, I also asked ChatGPT that if you were an evil leader, how would you ruin an organization? How would you destroy its future? And the robot came up with 6 behaviors, and those are the exact 6 behaviors that we noticed as a pattern within companies. So it was really interesting. Suppress psychological safety, that was the number one. How that affects the biomarkers. People are not sharing information. They're not inclusive. Micromanagement over trust. It's not about empowering people. It's about micromanaging them so they lose motivation completely. Have your favorite ones. That explains why a lot of teams are polarized. I've got my favorite people and others are rejected. Also, undermine growth and development. And this is what we can see. As soon as something happens, what is the first thing that companies cancel? Training, coaching, support. No, people are struggling. Why would you help them? Well, we can see what happens then. And in a way, it's understandable. You cannot even blame them because they don't see the return on investment. That's why we are focusing on 9 biomarkers directly linked to growth, profit, and engagement. Not happiness, no nothing, no. Biomarkers directly linked to profit, growth, and engagement. Because at the end of the day, this is what they need. The 5th one, short-term gains as priority. Who cares about the purpose, the long-term thinking? No, make money now, hit the targets next quarter. That is it. And the last one, poor communication. Often people say that, oh, we need to communicate more. No, you don't. You need better communication, not more. Clarity, more transparency. Because when you create a void, people fill in the gaps. And those assumptions tend to be negative. Then we discuss the ideas with people who are like us, people who have common sense. And now we believe it because we heard it from different sources. And that's when it goes wrong. And that's very much part of the transformation as well. So if you think about this last idea that I was reading about the dams, when you have the water and there's a dam in front of it, for very long, you don't see the cracks. The pressure is building up. But the problem is when you see the cracks, the collapse is very close. So would it make more sense to prevent it? That's my question. This is the data-driven is important. There's no place for guessing when it comes to business, people, and the future. So if this is something that you're interested in, let me know. If you need a summary of the slides, I'm going to put my email address in the chat so you can drop me a message and I'll send you a summary. If you would like to know more about it, how we can create a blueprint of why people think and behave differently, how we can get into decision intelligence, how our AI coach can help clients as well, how you can expand your comfort zone and enhance your behavior flexibility, there's plenty more. So I'm going to put my email here. Just drop me a message and I'm going to send it to you.